Daisy.
And I'm Terri.
And this is the Monday Mindset Podcast,
where we share things of interest to us and hopefully to you.
So let's get started with episode number 228. And this week it is Terri's turn to share something. Terri, what do you have?
Well, Daisy, as I have been kind of doing lately, I'm searching around looking for some new things. Poor Jim Quick, his numbers are going down because I'm not listening to every episode 5 times. But I found this podcast called Try This, and it is from the Washington Post, major news publication here. And it's a series of audio courses that are kind of designed to work on something. The host, her name is Christina Quinn, and they often kind of try and make some jokes during the episodes. They say they give some pointers with pithy, snackable solutions. And it's kind of funny because in the series I listened to, there were a number of food references. So each episode is one part of the course, and so they're really brief. And so I listened to season 1, and there are 5 episodes. And again, they're each 8 to 14 minutes long. And it's kind of funny, I was thinking, we just had an episode where you mentioned sleep several times, and you mentioned the temperature in the room when you're sleeping, because you were talking about cold exposure and brown fat. So season 1 is about sleep, and primarily difficulties with sleep. So you have presented topics on sleep before, and we've talked about sleep before, but this one's a little bit more of a kind of some suggestions of what to do if you're having difficulty sleeping. Now, obviously, if you're having severe sleep disorder or something, this would not be my first attempt to resolve that. But she broke it down into 5 parts of the course. And the first episode is called Stop Trying to Fall Asleep. Mm-hmm. And I realized as I was listening to these episodes that this reminds me a lot of my work as a therapist and things maybe I did well helping people asleep and things that I didn't do so well helping people asleep. But the first thing I always used to tell people is, stop looking at the clock because it creates more tension, more anxiety, more pressure. And at the time, I swear a lot of us still had those big digital clocks next to our bed with the big light up numbers.
Yeah, I got rid of mine.
Very good. So this episode really is just kind of highlighting that many of us, when we're struggling sleeping, we add to the problem because we focus on, I can't sleep. And she used this analogy, I'll share it here, but she had a psychologist named Lisa Strauss on, and she specializes in sleep. So most of her caseload is working with people with sleep difficulties. And she said that one of the things that most of us need to recognize is that sleep is a natural biological process. We do not have any control over it. But when we lay there trying to go to sleep, we're trying to control something that we can't control. And that just creates more tension. So kind of giving over the reins a little bit and recognizing my body will go to sleep when it will go to sleep. She talked about if you were in a boat and you capsized and you knew there was a rescue boat coming, but it was a long ways off, what would you do? And the other woman said, well, I'd panic or I'd start swimming. And she said, right, we think we should start swimming, but we're going to use up all of our energy. So instead, really, we should be treading water, like just a little bit of movement just to kind of minimal use of our energy. Don't use our resources while the boat is coming to get us. So let your body do what it's going to do. Use minimal effort to allow it to do that. So she talked about really this whole episode. It was very brief, but just the idea to stop thinking about, I need to go to sleep. Stop telling yourself you need to go to sleep. And instead, we're going to work on in these other episodes some ways that you can do that. She also mentioned that one of the things many of us have learned is to really focus on sleep hygiene, which can be very useful. However, what she said, even that, some of us, we over-focus on. Did I get the room temperature right? Did I blacken out all of the light? Did I do this? Did I do this? Did I do this? That now they've heightened their attention anyway. So getting those environmental things set up well is important, but try not to focus on them too much at the time that you're in bed to go to sleep.
Yeah, I can see the logic of that. If you haven't done one of the things that are on your checklist perfectly, oh no, that's going to mean I don't get to sleep.
And you can just hear kind of that anxious mind. If I set everything up just right, I'll go to sleep easily. What else can I set up? What else can I do properly? And again, just keeps the attention going. So big message of the first episode is to stop thinking about going to sleep. Stop trying to go to sleep. Stop trying to force yourself to go to sleep. It's almost like instead, my sister used to say this to her kids when they were little, like, Mommy, I can't sleep. And she'd say, that's okay, just rest. Just lay there and rest, totally different approach. But that is what this episode was saying. Let your body rest so that the rescue can come and sleep will come.
It's really funny, actually, because that's a note I made about that, was because it's something that I've had trouble with sometimes, is getting to sleep. Usually once I'm asleep, I'm all right. And it's something that I used to say to myself, look, the worst, if you just lay here and be calm, the worst you're going to get is you're at least going to be rested.
That's right.
You're not actively doing something. You are going to get rest. And sooner or later, the chances are you'll get some actual sleep too.
That's right. So episode 2 is called Go Ahead, Think About the Thing That's Keeping You Up. So oftentimes people experience it that there's a stressor or there's an anxiety, there's a worry, something that, like you were describing, once you lay down is on your mind. So you have a hard time falling asleep. So what she recommends with this is early in the day, in the morning actually, think about and spend some time processing through what it is that you're worried about. Give your brain this opportunity, and this ties into with another one of the episodes, but give your brain this opportunity to spend some time on this topic, whatever it is, so that you're not waiting to spend time on this topic when you're trying to go to sleep. So it's kind of like getting it out of the way early in the day when you still have some ability to do something about it. So that one, again, pretty brief episode, really focusing on giving yourself the opportunity to work through some of the worry and anxiety way before ever getting to bed. Episode 3, I think for some of us also is pretty interesting. What to do if you're up in the middle of the night. Because unlike what you described, Daisy, where it's once you get to sleep, you can generally stay asleep, a lot of people struggle with waking up and not being able to get back to sleep.
Oh, yeah. I have quite a few friends who have that problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's quite often that's something that starts happening around menopause type time as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. And sometimes it's sparked by something very natural. Like, the ideal is that we do wake, like you've talked about the sleep cycles. We wake like every 90 minutes very naturally. The ideal is that you just roll over and go right back to sleep. But some of us, become more alert during that time. We start thinking about something, we start worrying, we start making a list of things we have to do. We get overwhelmed. We have kids that wake us up in the middle of the night. I had a night last night where I was probably up 8 times with different pet issues. Koa got up in the middle of the night barking at a raccoon. An hour later, barking at a raccoon again. Somewhere along the way, Gracie decided she needed to eat in the middle of the night, and then she needed to wander around the bathroom, bumping into things. It was just one of those really disrupted sleep nights for me. So we have things in our environment that wake us up, and we have our natural wake up, and then we have a hard time going back to sleep. One of the tips that I've always shared with people, because I learned this from a sleep psychiatrist, and I thought it was a brilliant idea, so I apologize to everyone that I ever told to do this. But one of the strategies that is often shared is to do something that occupies your brain, because technically our brain can only be on one track at a time. We can switch tracks back and forth quickly, but in any given moment, we can only be on one track. So the goal with some of these strategies is to put your brain in one track so that you're not doing the worry and thinking about these other things. So what I always used to tell people is count backwards by 7s or 3s or whatever. And it's so funny when I was listening to this because it was exactly the one she used. And she used like 2000, start at 2000 and count backwards by 7s. And the woman interviewing the psychologist said, oh my gosh, well, that would be horrible. That would be like 1992, blah, blah, blah. That would be so hard. And she says, well, actually, it would be 1993, but let's go on. So one of the reasons she said that might not be the best is because it does get you into a goal-focused way of thinking. And then for some of us, that will engage our brain to finish the goal and to do the goal properly. So it might not be as helpful in distracting us as we would like. Now, the suggestion she actually did share, there's a caveat to, and in my years of kind of focusing on biohacking things, we don't want to look at a lot of light. We don't want to have light during the night. And what she did recommend is using an app or an audio book or an actual book. Now, all of these are going to involve light, looking at blue light. So she did put the caveat in there that this would be a great time to get some blue blocking glasses. And she said, not the pretty ones that you wear during the day that just clear lenses that look like normal glasses, the ones that look like bright gold goggles. She says, you're in your jammies. You don't look good anyway. Like, just put the goggles on. But talked about the benefit of something to listen to or to read that is not goal focused. Like, don't read a how-to that you need to know the steps you need to pay attention to in that way. Something a little bit light. And she said that for some people, something that's a little bit more, I don't remember the word she used, not necessarily spiritual in nature, but I find, for example, I go to sleep very well to like a Wayne Dyer book. It's just talking about how to kind of live your life in a way that's not using your brain in the same way you did, but there's no content that you have to really track. The voice is gentle and, you fall asleep a couple chapters in. She did describe having it set up ahead of time, because you don't want to, at 2:30 a.m., have to then find something to listen to. Have it ready. If you're listening to an audiobook that is, easy in content for you, have it ready. But she also talked about you don't want to listen to it for the rest of your sleep. And I am guilty of doing that. I will put something on that just keeps playing more and more. And hours later, I'm distracted because I'm hearing bits and pieces of things that I can't even piece together.
Oh yeah, no, I put it on a timer when I do that.
Brilliant. Same with the TV. I turn on the TV and like 3 hours later, the TV is still on. And I'm like, where am I in that episode? So definitely kind of set it up ahead of time so that you don't have to spend time creating work in the middle of the night. You don't want to engage your brain in the task. Just turn it on and let the voice that you're listening to, or if you are reading an actual book, that you just kind of get lost in it until you go back to sleep. But again, don't spend your focus thinking about how much you have to go back to sleep and why can't you go back to sleep, because that's going to defeat the whole purpose. The next one, episode 4, was called Sleep is a Ball of Pizza Dough. Now, this analogy did not work so well for me, and I love analogies, but I think I understand what she's talking about. In talking about all of these strategies so far, she said some of us are still going to find that we're having difficulty. Our body just isn't ready to go into that sleep state. And she said it's because we have this thing called sleep drive. And oftentimes when we're struggling, we haven't created enough sleep drive. And there's a big strategy to do to help with this. So your body is just not feeling the need to sleep when you lay down. Now think about it. Some of us might go to bed at 7 o'clock and lay there for a couple of hours and read and do this. And, again, just kind of waiting for sleep. but we haven't necessarily created sleep drive. And so this is where she brings in this analogy of the pizza dough. And she says,
I'm still trying to figure out where the pizza dough is coming in. How's that going to work?
If the amount of time you have for sleep is like this ball of pizza dough, and you start to roll it out on a cutting board. If you roll it out on a really large cutting board, it gets really thin, there are holes in it. That's kind of like our sleep. So if I give myself 12 hours when I could sleep, there's no drive.
Oh, I see, yeah.
So she said, I want you to picture the pizza dough on a small cutting board. You're only rolling it out so that it's still pretty thick and fluffy. There aren't holes in it. It's pretty solid and it's smooth, and I'm picturing like a cushy pillow, but the idea that you want to teach yourself sleep compression.
Yeah, I can see where you're going. You want to teach yourself to really fill a certain space.
That's rather than just have all of this space available, because sleep drive dissipates when you sleep. Like as soon as you go to sleep, it's kind of like eating a meal. As soon as you eat the meal, you don't have the drive to go get the food. Like you've already achieved it. And then your sleep drive builds throughout the day and is highest at night. That's what's supposed to help us sleep. But many of us have our sleep drive cycle really kind of off kilter. So she talks about a strategy called sleep compression, and that's what we want to teach ourselves to do. And that is, you set a time, like I'm going to bed at 11 and I'm getting up at 6:30. So you only have these hours available. Now, for some people, it might be different hours. That's fine. And I know when you talked about sleep, we talked about are there ideal hours and how many hours and things. But she said the most important thing here is that we're just not leaving it open-ended. Going to bed at a specific time and getting up at a specific time. Doesn't mean we're going to sleep that whole time. But, if you're aiming for 7 to 7.5, you block that out. And you keep as consistent as you can to it, because this is what will heighten the sleep drive. Your body knows when it will happen, and it's going to, like I said, build throughout the day up until that point. It'll dissipate and it'll start over again. So if you push your snooze 5 times in the morning, when you say you're going to get up at 6:30, it actually is interfering with your sleep pattern. And, she did mention the circadian rhythm, which is a totally different thing, but this is the drive to sleep. And the circadian rhythm is really based on sunlight and how your body learns when to sleep. But this is about creating that tension kind of drive for sleep. So I thought that one was really important, that many of us might need to work on this strategy of sleep compression, giving ourselves this specific time. I think both you and I have talked about when we start staying up later and then we start getting up later, we just kind of move into these long windows of availability. And again, the body doesn't have that strong sleep drive then. So getting our body set up in that way.
It's interesting that you mentioned, you sort of likened it to a meal, the drive falling off once you start eating. But it feels like you could expand that a bit in building up the appetite so that you're really hungry when you start your meal. Feels like a similar thing. Like you don't want to be snacking for a few hours before, if your meal's at 7 o'clock, you don't want to start picking on bits and pieces at 4 o'clock, because we've been told this by our parents over and over, you'll ruin your appetite, you'll spoil dinner. It feels like a sort of similar thing. You build that appetite for it,
That's
build
right.
the drive, build the need.
And I'm so glad you said that, Daisy, because while you're working on this, you do not take naps, because that is going to totally disrupt. Just like having a snack is going to ruin your appetite for dinner, having a nap is going to ruin your sleep drive. It's not going to rebuild between 4 p.m. when you took a nap and 11 p.m. when you go to bed. So it's really important when you're working on this sleep compression that you go to bed at that specific time, you get up at that specific time, and you don't take a nap during the day. Key point. Thank you for pointing that one out. Very good. And then the last episode 5, is called the melatonin factor. And as with many of the hormones and things in our body, melatonin goes in cycles. And we build melatonin through getting light. This is why people focus so much on getting sunlight early in the day, blocking blue light later in the day, because that actually erodes away the melatonin that your body makes. So talked a little bit about taking melatonin, using melatonin supplement. And she described something that I thought was really interesting. Researchers have found that the melatonin use in the US more than quintupled between 1999 and 2018. So we've started to see maybe an over-reliance on melatonin. And kind of like you were saying earlier, Daisy, melatonin, from what researchers can find, really can help with the falling asleep, but it is no guarantee that you'll stay asleep. Mm-hmm. But why is it that some people then feel really groggy in the morning if they've taken melatonin? And part of it is because of the dosing, that the melatonin in the US, you can buy it over the counter. I know in some places you have to have a prescription for it, but the dosing is so high, it can be 200 and 300 times higher than what the actual levels our body would make.
Right, yeah.
So what it does when it's too high is it's actually activating other things. It's activating serotonin. It's activating dopamine. It's activating other hormones that then lead to this, grogginess or something later in the day or in the morning. So I got the sense from the way they talked about melatonin, it can be used as a remedy sometimes, but that if we use it every night, and especially at the really high doses that are available, that we actually can be disrupting our melatonin system. And so we want to really save it for those more stressful times or more challenging times, maybe. But again, just a number of things to kind of go through. Another thing that I remembered as we were talking, Daisy, is one of the strategies she talked about, similar to the kind of allowing yourself to worry in the morning, was that you can later in the day, not close to bedtime, that you can designate a period of time where you are going to focus on your concerns, what it is that keeps you up at night. A little different than what she was talking about in the morning. But in this example, she talked about creating a list with 4 columns. In the first column, you write down what are the things that are worrying me or stressing me out. And then you look at those things and you say, what of these can I do something about in the next 2 weeks? And if the answer is I can't do anything about that in the next 2 weeks, then I have to kind of put it on my list of, then I can't think about it because there's nothing I can do about it anyway.
Well, there's no point.
That's right. But then if I think about there is something I can do about it, then you're going to go into the next columns. You're going to write, what is it that I can do? And you're going to write down, when am I going to do it? So now when you go to bed, that thing that's worrying you, you have a very specific plan. So much less potential to perseverate at night, just mulling it over and over and over again. You've got your plan set up. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that is actually a strategy that I did used to teach my people, but not for sleep, but just about worry and anxiety. That if we give ourselves some planned time to focus on it, then we can not go into that line of thinking at other times, and we can start to kind of compartmentalize that worry or that stressor. And she emphasized that period of time should not last longer than 30 minutes, and it shouldn't be right before bed. Obviously, then you're going to be thinking about it right before bed. So just some, I think, real world kinds of things that we all can work on if we're struggling with falling back asleep or going to sleep, if sleep is a challenge for us.
Yes, it's really interesting, actually. I thought the thing that struck a chord with me was the whole pizza dough thing. But this restricting the time and creating the drive and having a sort of a set sleep window. I'm definitely guilty of hitting the snooze thing in the morning, but One of the ways I don't allow myself to keep doing that for too long, and now this is not every day, but on my dog field days, I've purposely booked the earliest slot of the day. So I have to get up.
Mm-hmm.
I have to get up in time to make some coffee, get the dogs in the car and get to the dog field to make the most of that time. Now, of course, I don't have to get up, but if I don't, I lose the time that I've paid money that I can't afford to lose. So it makes me get up at a certain time. Other days are a bit more flexible. You know, as you know, the work I do is from home and I can mostly move things around as and when I want to. But that's certainly one of the ways. But if you're doing that reasonably regularly, then you find that you do naturally start waking up at the same time. So doing something like that every other day has the roll-on effect on the other days. But what I have noticed, as you mentioned that we both have struggled with sometimes, is leaving it too late to go to bed. But something that got me thinking about, because I thought, well, is it a bad thing to go to bed longer? And I think it's as the daylight hours are closing in. You know, I was going to bed. It gets dark much later, obviously, in the summer. And it wasn't long after starting to get dark that I was going to bed. In the summer, I was starting to go to bed a bit earlier. But we're not talking super early, 10:30, 11 or something. But as that's got earlier and earlier, because I've associated with it starting to get dark, it's time to go to bed, that's when I start getting sleepy. But now, it's starting to get dark a lot earlier. So, sort of creeps in. It feels like it comes in very quickly this time of year. By 7:30, it's dark. And I'm starting to feel a bit sleepy. And I'm like, 8:30, is it too early to go to bed? And sometimes I'm just like, well, I might as well go to bed. But it made me sort of rethink, well, actually, maybe that's not such a good idea. And I should have more of a set time. Because I'd been sort of thinking, oh, well, if I sleep for longer, maybe is that a problem? Isn't it not just a good thing if you get more sleep? But yeah, maybe not necessarily.
And I think especially if we're working through a period of depression or something, just being mindful that also sleeping for long periods of time can become part of like an avoidance strategy of, I feel kind of crappy anyway. I might as well just sleep longer.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, it's always been one of my go-tos. Yeah.
So I think it's, is it a problem to once in a while sleep longer? I mean, I think we probably all experience it where sometimes we go to sleep at 6 p.m. and we don't get up until the next morning. I don't think that's a problem once in a while. But consistently, like as it starts getting darker earlier, if you start going to bed every night at 7, that is stretching the pizza dough very thin.
Yeah. So actually, although it was a weird analogy, when you talked about it, the difference between, some people like a really thin pizza, but, let's get away from the pizza. But stretching it, just thinking of the fact that if you're stretching it too thin and you're starting to get holes in it, it's no longer a solid structure that you want, rather than a nice, thick, plump, fluffy structure, which is the ideal, a good solid block of sleep. Yeah, I can see that. That definitely gave me something to think about.
Very good. I know sometimes I listen to podcasts in the middle of the night when I wake up. Gracie gets up and I'm walking around the house, so then I'll lay down and just turn on a podcast. But again, I have to be mindful. It can't be one I'm really invested in.
Definitely, yeah.
Because then I'll stay awake to listen and hear what they say next. So it needs to be one that's kind of mundane and just kind of, I can drift off.
Well, they have these sleep apps, don't they, where they read some... it's not complete inane drivel, but it's not anything that has any kind of meaningful plot to it or anything. It's enough to sort of capture your interest that you focus on it, but not enough that you're bothered about the outcome.
And actually, some of the apps even have children's bedtime stories on them. Not necessarily just for your kids, but for you as an adult, because you're not going to be so invested in that storyline. And there's no action packed, there's no thriller ending or anything that you have to stay connected for.
Yeah, very interesting. I'll definitely be thinking a bit more about the pizza dough, but maybe not taking it into the cold shower.
Oh, but she did talk about, I'm so sorry going back to your episode from last week, she did talk about there is such great support for sleeping in a cooler room and the benefits of that. She said, just don't get so focused on that you're like, oh my gosh, I can't sleep. I have to go turn the heat down. But I had to laugh as I was listening to these and thinking about your episode from last week.
Definitely. Well, some good tips to think about there.
Very good.
Until we meet up again, I hope you have a very wonderful week.
Take good care, everybody.